Hello and welcome to our first ever live, um, our first ever Empire Watch weekly live. I'm Ileana Chan. Every week on this show, we would like to break down the weekly news from around the world through an anti-imperialist lens. Every week on Friday at 12 p.m. UTC, we will be challenging the mainstream media narrative and examine what's really going on behind the headlines and the propaganda. I'm Ileana Chan, and this is my co-host, Sara Vivacqua. Welcome to Empire Watch, Sara.
Thanks, Ileana, for inviting me to join your show. As some of my audience know, already run a show in Brazil at Diário do Centro do Mundo, and I really wanted to be part of the Empire Watch for many reasons, but one of them to deconstruct the colonial narratives. We want to call out on those tired terminology and analyze what is going on in the whole world. The whole as a world, the entire world means Russia, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Latin America, Micronesia. We want to contemplate the entire planet and not just copy and paste what the mainstream media is offering us in the international analysis. And we want you to join the conversation. We want people from all over the world, Pakistan, India, Brazil, Indonesia, Cambodia, and beyond. And we are here to ask questions that matter, to dig into the comments you send to us. We want to establish real conversations, and we want to see how the local news is attached to a wider policy, world policy. This is very important to us. And I think, Ileana, I think also for the people in the hegemonic countries like US, Canada, UK, I think people feel also oppressed by this type of, let's say, colonial policies or imperialistic policies. So I hope you join us. I hope this is going to be one of the many Fridays we're going to meet. Our time of broadcast is mainly directed at the Asian Nobel time, so to say. We want to talk to Asia. We want to learn with Asia. And but we are talking about the whole world like today we are.
Yeah, we try to do so. We're doing breakfast in Brazil, lunch in the UK, and dinner in Asia. We are not actually focused on the US, but that's because we're mainly talking about them. No, just kidding. It's because we are dismantling US media propaganda narratives. So it's kind of important for us to reach really the wider global South, maybe more so important because a lot of what the US empire does affects the global South directly and really in a very devastating way. So that's our focus and our emphasis on the show. And the way we are structuring the show.
We want to talk to the people also in these countries, US, UK, who are bothered by this type of policies. I think people there feel oppressed because I used to feel oppressed when I was leaving the UK. So we also want to talk to this audience in those countries who feel the weight and feel like everything is their fault. No, it's not your fault. It's because you're buying the system. You're buying the lies of the system. You're buying the propaganda of the system. You want to dismantle that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that's really important to note is that the power of the people in the global North is actually quite big. It's just that we've been brainwashed to believe we have no power. And so the responsibility, along with power, comes responsibility and accountability. And I think as long as people in the global North are buying into all the propaganda that the US empire spews around the world, we are actually complicit within the actions of the US empire. So this is actually also really important. I mean, this is why I started the whole Global Majority for Peace in the first place, is because I just realized this huge amount of ignorance about our own active participation in imperial agendas. And it is actually our responsibility to understand what's going on and understand what our governments are doing and, try to change that. But why am I focusing more on the global South is because it's more urgent. Yes, it is the responsibility of the people in the global North to stop our governments, but it's more urgent for people in the global south because they are directly affected by the devastating policies, foreign policies of the US empire every day. And as we know, the US is actually escalating towards a war against China by 2027. All their think tanks are saying that as their date, that they want a war with China. And that war is not just a direct invasion from the US to China. This will include proxy wars in the region. So, for people in the global south, it is so much more urgent that we don't fall into this propaganda. And for people in the global north, it is also urgent that we stand with the people in the global south and for ourselves too, obviously. But I do still have maybe a little bit more of an emphasis on the global south because of the urgency. So, but you're right to correct me on that, Sarah. We shouldn't be dismissing the global north. We all have responsibilities in the global north, and we do have power. We just have to reclaim our power.
Absolutely, because we need to have a wider conscience of the world. We are subject to Russia as the enemy, China as the enemy, everyone. We always need to find an enemy instead of looking at ourselves. The immigrants are the enemy. No, it's our local policies. It's our austerity policies that makes our lives so damning. It's our past. It's the imperial past that waits also within. And it's going to crack. So I think there is also a restlessness in the global north to see a bigger world, because this world that is being presented to us is so without perspective, is so self-blaming, is so manipulated. And I think, as you say, manipulation goes with emotional confusion, and we get trapped in this emotional confusion because this is part of the game. Start blaming ourselves. Well, because I don't have a good job, because maybe I didn't do it right. No, it's because the system is conceived for you not to have the opportunities, because this is a world, neoliberal world. It's a lot of opportunities for very few people, and we can't change that. I strongly believe that when people get together, when people get organized, things can change. Things have changed throughout humanity a great deal, and I think we can still believe in these changes, especially when you're not happy where we are. And I think as the European society is seeing a militarization, a oppression of dissent, a barbaric oppression of dissent. We're going to get into that, and that's why we want to start this conversation with people. We've been there, we've been the global north, we've been the global south. We want to bring those two perspectives together in a liberating way.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. And I just would like to add on to that to clarify for the audience where austerity measures in the global north links up with imperialism, US empire and imperialism. Imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism. Okay, remember that part. It is the natural outgrowth of capitalism. It is the highest stage of capitalism, meaning that if we want to change any of these austerity policies, if we actually want socialist policies in the global north, we have to deal with imperialism. We have no choice on that. So that is where we have to make those links. We have to stop sort of atomizing these issues as if they're not linked. They're all linked under the US empire and imperialism. And there are alternatives to that, which we will be actually discussing a lot of these later on in the show with our very special guest, Carlos Martinez from Friends of Socialist China. But first, let me just do a little introduction for how this show is going to be structured so we understand what we're looking at every week. We have a little graphic for us over here. I'm going to put that up there. Right. So here we are. We are going to be doing two stories about everyone is talking about, which is Zoran Mamdani wins in New York. And then, of course, the Rio de Janeiro state massacre. And then two stories everyone should be talking about or should be talking more about is what's happening in Sudan and Britain's direct role in Gaza genocide exposed. And the top stories on our radar this week, as I mentioned before, with a special guest, Carlos Martinez, co-founder and editor of Friends of Socialist China. We will be discussing the aftermath of the Xi and Trump meeting in South Korea and other updates from China. Carlos Martinez is a researcher, political activist from the UK, and author of the book, The East is Still Red, Chinese Socialism in the 21st Century. He is a co-founder and co-editor of Friends of Socialist China and a co-founder of No Cold War. So that's who we have to look forward to. And also on our radar, last but definitely not least, the Israeli soldier who confessed to gang rape in 2024 and why that's back in the headlines. It's a particularly horrific story. Okay, so to start us off, I guess.
Zohan Mamdani wins the New York City. He's now the new mayor. He's 34 years old. And if we look at the demographics, 32% of Jews voted for him, Ileana, and New York City is the Jewish city per se, far before Israel was, right? We know that Dutch Jewish went to Recife in Brazil, didn't like that, was expelled by the British, and they went to New York and founded New York. So it's the foundation, New York City, is Jewish, and a big chunk of the population is Jewish. Now we have 32% of the Jewish and a huge part of the young generation voting for him. Tell us a little bit about Zohan, how he won.
Okay, so I'm going to sort of separate this into domestically what we can take away from for the New York public itself, and some my thoughts on that, and then also why he won, etc. And then also I'm going to talk about how we should feel about it as anti-imperialists. Okay, so from the global south. So first of all, starting with, I have to say, this is a victory for New York people, all right, New York public. One of the main takeaways we can take from this is that they are hungering for a change. I'm going to show you his platform, which, if I can figure out this technical issue that we're having. But basically, I think what we have to remember here is that he was primarily famous for two things. He ran on basically this, let me take that away. He ran on, so basically he was kind of known for two things here. First of all, he's known for, thank you, Sarah. He's known for being a democratic socialist, which I actually think is an incorrect labeling for him. I don't think he's a democratic socialist.
Why do you think? Well, don't you think, like, when you say I'm a democratic socialist, I'm also trying to pretend I'm not a socialist, and maybe I am, I'm not?
Yeah, I think that's the issue that I'm having with the term democratic socialist, because it suggests an adjective for the noun socialist. And he's not a socialist. He's running as a Democrat. So the most that we can say about him is he's a socialist Democrat, because he's a proud Democrat. And the Democrat Party, the US is a duopoly. I think we all know that. Both the Republican and Democratic parties are part of the establishment, which is part of the US. And the US is the leader of the US empire. It sort of goes back to that. So both parties are going to be imperialist and capitalist. Like, that is absolutely inevitable. When you're caught in this duopoly, there's this feeling like, vote blue no matter who, right? So there's very little between them, and they sort of work as controlled opposition for each other. All right, so that is the limitation of running as a Democrat, but we'll get into like what he's actually saying here, which is New York is too expensive. Zoran will lower costs and make life easier. This is what New Yorkers care about. Their lives are too expensive. Their lives are too difficult because of just the lack of affordability. Now, remember, the US does not have universal health care. It has a rising homeless population. It has a drug epidemic. It has like so many issues that really the average person is dealing with, and they're in survival mode. So this is a victory for the U.S. people in New York, for the New York people who want some sort of change, this is a temperature check for where they are. It took a lot for them to win this. Even though he's a Democrat, it took a lot for him to win because there was ranked choice voting in New York, which they don't have ranked choice voting all over the U.S. So he may not have won in another part of the U.S., okay? But there's that part of it. Like all these different social movements came up and supported him, much more socialist movements like PSL. Many people from that came up and supported him. But the thing that really still remains, because he's part of the Democratic Party, it's like their work starts now. Their work starts now because how do you hold this guy accountable? Sorry, not to be rude, but how do you hold anyone accountable in the Democratic Party? You need levers of power. And right now, the US is just, the American people feel so exhausted by their lack of supposed power, which, like I said, is a bit of a myth, but that is the general population's feeling about their government, that the government doesn't work for them. So this is a victory for them. He did win despite pretty big odds, despite being in the Democratic Party, but it is still, we still need to be, this idea, for example, I don't know if you have that one where Sadiq Khan is like, this is a victory for hope. Okay.
We have that, yeah, we certainly do.
Yeah,
you may need to explain to people who is Sadiq Khan.
Who is Sadiq Khan? He is the mayor of London, and he's also Muslim, and that's basically all I can really say about that. But he's the mayor of London. He's also Muslim, and this is this is his op-ed in Time. So he's making it out as if this is a victory for hope, and of course Sadiq Khan would say that also in the empire, also not really a socialist. It's not really the endorsement he thinks it is, okay? But that brings me to the other point why it is also kind of a victory, is that the other thing about Mamdani is that he was known as not being a Zionist, okay? So that's the thing, is that the bar is so low that all the other candidates, they said the first thing that they would do if they won is to go to Israel. It's like, hello, you were the mayor of New York. Why would that be the first thing that you would do? And only Mamdani was like, well, actually, there's a lot to do here in New York. I'm focusing on New York. So, so what I think that can tell us is this Zionist mosque that has been used to justify and cover for imperial crimes in Palestine, to cover for genocide in Palestine. It is slipping even in the US. And the US just sort of, shockingly, the rest of the world, I think, can already see through this Zionist mosque. But the US is only in the last 2 years that has this mosque actually slipped.
Ileana, do you think that the fact that 30% of the Jews voted in New York, New York is not representative for the US, but it's representative for the vanguard of the US and the vanguard of many things in the world? But I know you will dispute it totally, but in the US, it's definitely a vanguard. And why do you think this 30% of Jews voted for Muslim? This is almost impossible to think, because the US ran a Islamophobic campaign that began on September 11. After September 11, all Muslims were terrorists and rapists. How come today, in this day and age, where you have 30% of the Jews voting for a Muslim, a proud Muslim from Africa? How do you explain that?
I mean, I think because we should not also be racist and think that all Jews are genocidal, anti-intellectual, psychotic people, right? Like, that is what Zionism suggests. Zionism, by conflating Judaism and Jewish people with Zionism, is saying that about all Jews. I mean, if I was Jewish, I would be outraged at this characterization.
Yeah.
It's horrific. So, I mean, I think we can say that, the other thing too is that the demographic of Jews in New York, I don't have the statistics, but they're well known to be, middle class, upper middle class. I mean, it's not really the oppressed minority, the uneducated, ignorant minority. So, that is part of the thing. This is common sense.
And you know what? They haven't seen in pictures for the past 2 years a genocide 24/7. And I think they don't want to be accomplice. There are a lot of Jews that they don't feel they are accomplice to Israel. And I think the Israeli propaganda is cracking. If you see MAGA, hardcore MAGA, let's say commentators just like Tucker Carlson, Candace Owen, Megan Riley, and Megan Right. So these people, they are speaking out against Israel. They are against this genocide. They don't want make Israel great again. They want to make America great again. So I think there is within the Republican Party, and especially the youth, people don't want to be accomplice to that. I think
and they are. I mean, they are.
This is a win against the Zionist lobby who puts loads of money to elect the opposition, whoever there is. There is a show where Mamdani is being argued by a panel of Zionist journalists asking, would you go to Israel? And he says, no, I will go first to the synagogues in New York because this is the place that I have the mandate for. Where is your first place that you would go? Everyone else saying, Cuomo saying, we're going to go to Israel. Okay. So it was a Jewish massive Zionist. And when I see Mamdani's victory, I think it's a clear sign that Israel propaganda, New York, no longer.
Well, I mean, I think it's definitely showing the slipping of the mask, like I said before. But in terms of foreign policy, he is just the mayor of New York. Let's just remember that.
Yeah, you're right.
Looking over kind of to, as an anti-imperialist, how do we consume this? What do we take away from this? Again, this America, of course, I shouldn't even say America, the US, of course, is just very much thinks it's the center of the universe. And fair enough, in the media landscape, it is the center of the universe because they do spend billions of dollars on their propaganda. So in terms of what can we look at from Sara Vivacqua for foreign policy, first of all, he's just the mayor of New York. However, he's still significant because the Democratic Party is pretty desperate to go up against Trump, right? And so even though he's just the mayor of New York, his name is still in the conversation for who could be the next presidential candidate against Trump. Like, they are already considering him as like a potential new Democratic presidential candidate. And also they're hoping that his win will sort of create not a landslide, but like will influence other elections.
A wave of different independent candidates that will be swallowed by the system at some point, but will at least prompt something new.
Yeah, let's be very clear. This is not about independent. This is not independent. This is Democrat, socialist, but non-pro-Zionist socialist. Well, not socialist, but kind of socialist policy Democrat. Non-Zionist wave of new candidates. This is the hope, right? This is definitely the hope. So we can see that this might actually be an interesting thing for the Democratic Party to grab hold of. And this is where it gets a little bit more dicey for anti-imperialists and for us in the Global South to pay attention to, because as we can remember, like I said initially, the Democratic Party is part of the U.S. empire. It is the establishment party of the U.S. empire. Its main focus is to further imperialist agendas, okay? So if they can use Mamdani or people like Mamdani to cover a new ethical mask for imperialism, that is very dangerous, because remember, Obama had this veneer about him, and it was actually much easier. Easier is something else, but his policies, his foreign policies, his U.S. sanctions. I recently just talked to the Venezuelan editor of Orinoco Tribune, Jesus Rodriguez Espinoza. He is the co-founder and editor of Orinoco Tribune. And he was talking about how it's the 2015 US sanctions that was under Obama that has really caused this incredible impoverishment of Venezuela. Now they have 70% poverty rate, down from 27% under Hugo Chavez. So we have to remember that imperialism has this very long arm, very long reach. And if they have an effective mask like Zoran Mamdani, who, we are primed to like, okay? We're primed to like. And this is why we have to just be much more vigilant as anti-imperialists or as people who care about humanity. Because let's look at this interview he did right before he got elected, but he basically was being accused of being a communist, and to to defend himself. Let me just show you this. Do you know where it is?
I know where you want to.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Venezuela and how they really stand as true imperialists. Yeah.
Yeah. He gave this interview, this podcast, to address the smears. Because remember, in the US, if you're a communist or a socialist, that is a huge smear against you. And this was his response to that allegation. So if you can see here, he says, I want to be clear on where I stand. I believe both Nicolas Maduro and Miguel Diaz-Canel are dictators. Their administrations have stifled free and fair elections, jailed political opponents, and suppressed the free and fair press. And yet our federal government's long history of punitive policies towards both countries, including extrajudicial killings of Venezuelans and the continuation of a decades-long blockade of Cuba, have only worsened these conditions. Democratic socialism is about dignity, justice, and accountability, etc. So I think of this as the propaganda sandwich. Okay, so right up the top, he comes out swinging with huge propaganda against Nicolas Maduro and Diaz-Canel, calling them dictators. These are the CIA talking points against socialist countries. This is what they talk. They assert against these head of states in order to justify infiltration and justify invasions and regime change. This is the exact rhetoric that they use.
Perfect. And then, you know what? This is where now we understand what this strange neologism, democratic socialist, comes, right? He wants to say, well, I'm very different from Maduro. I'm very different from Miguel Diaz-Canel. I am a democratic. That means I am a capitalistic neoliberal, and I think socialism is compatible with that. I am an American. And as you say, CIA talking points, because in America, people are brainwashed about the realities in South America, the realities in China, in Russia. This, since the Cold War is brainwashed about words like communism, socialism. These are stigmatizing words. Revolutionary, radicals. These are CIA talking points, and the press. We need to think that the CIA is massively present in the press. MI6 is massively present in the press. We've seen this in the case of Julian Assange. When he wanted to release the cables, the department, I think it was the State Department, wants to have an editorial authority over what is being said in the press. So they do hold an editorial authority of what the press can say and cannot. And that's how you build opinion. At school, you don't study history. In the UK, people study history until they are 13. They know nothing about their empire. They just see the glory, Prince William, Prince Harry, Lady Di. That's how they grow up. They don't touch the dirt part of their history and create a lot of fantasies, a lot of fantastic enemies. And I think, phantasmagoric ideas about the world.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, from an anti-imperialist point of view, I think this is more from the outside. We just have to be vigilant about this sort of thing, because Mamdani could very well be used to clean up the propaganda, like to give a genteel face again to US propaganda. So we have to be careful. And also, in terms of hope, like, I would just say this much, Sadiq Khan getting hope or whatever this, if you are in the global south and you want hope, do not look at the global north. They're not the ones that are making the achievements for humanity. They're the ones that are opposing achievement for humanity. If you want hope, look at the Sahel states, look at Burkina Faso, what they're doing there. Look at China, for God's sake. China has done such an amazing job in terms of lifting up 800 million people from absolute poverty. The expansion of so many policies that they have in China really is more of a Marxist socialist.
Look at the effervescence of the revolutionary movements in South America, in Africa, for instance.
Yes. And also, I talked about
people free to think and talk.
Exactly. Like, I think it's really important that we don't forget these revolutionary movements that were genuinely revolutionary. I mean, I just talked about Venezuela, and the thing that is just so infuriating about the situation, and it's more than infuriating, but like I said, in 2015, the Obama US sanctions caused this impoverishment, this cascade of economic issues that they've had, and now they have a 70% poverty level. But Hugo Chavez, during his presidency, he managed to get the poverty rate from 50% to 27%. So we're talking about, it takes so much to do that sort of thing. And I know Lula in Brazil also greatly reduced poverty as well. So we have to be looking at the global south really for examples of what human progress looks like. Don't look at the global north. They're specifically primed against human progress. And also, we have to remember that, like, there's a reason why Americans, the US public generally, are seen as so ignorant. It's because they're being purposefully made ignorant via their institutions, via their whole infrastructure. Just like the propaganda that we consume, they consume more because their entire ecosystem is from the belly of the beast. So
I thought you would say because of their ego system.
They do also have an ego.
It's the ego of the empire. It's just really damning.
It is true. It is definitely true. That is one of their number one problems. But anyway, so now moving on from the story, I said that I wasn't going to take that long on this, but I guess I went off on it for a bit too long.
It was right, yeah.
Let's move on to something else that is grabbing the headlines now. It's the Rio State massacre. And I have to say, it sounds absolutely horrific, and I can't really get my mind around it, Sarah. So could you help break down what's actually happening, starting with what these headlines are referring to?
Footage while I'm talking, Ileana, do you think you can remove that one? Because I think this footage is so damning. This is the people of Rio de Janeiro while the massacre. There's a lot to talk here, Ileana. This Rio massacre is not an isolated incident of police violence. Far from it. And it's not an isolated domestic incident. It's a strategy. Castro, the governor of Rio, far right, close ally of Bolsonaro, ordered this as an act of his electoral campaign to say, look, I am going against trafficking. I have a strong hand. I use violence if I want to. I kill people if I want to. And there is a population that applauds this, unfortunately. So he wants to say that he's combating organized crime. But the irony is that he has ties to the organized crime, and we're going to get into that. And so it's when you have a lot of factions, one of them is in power, they use the state power to eliminate the rival factions while protecting their own criminal networks. This is what it is about. And Castro, CNN Brazil revealed that the governor Castro handed over confidential public security reports directly to the US consulate and negotiated with both the US government and the DEA intelligence agency, requesting help to go against a specific drug cartel. So this is his strategy. He wants, yeah.
Sorry, can you repeat that? He requested who? He requested help from the U.S. military?
Yes, Castro himself, the governor Rio, who ordered this massacre, before ordering the massacre, he handed over confidential public security reports from Rio de Janeiro state to the US consulate. He negotiated with the DEA intelligence agency and tried to get hold of people in the White House to ask for a specific faction in the drug cartel to be recognized as narco-terrorists. And
wow.
the Workers' Party, on the back of this, filed a case in the Supreme Court against Castro, the governor Rio, for crimes of attacks against national sovereignty and for espionage. Yeah, so there's many layers of that. So it's very interesting because right after the massacre, we had Trump offering help. Yeah, Trump saying, "Oh, look, we're going to help you to put the military on the streets, to do a military-like raid." And what we see here is there is an alignment with the Brazilian far right, a convergence of interest with the MAGA strategy for Latin America. And not only there is a convergence, they are talking, they are asking help from each other. Do you know that we have Brazilian parliamentarians going to US and pleading for the classification of some drug cartels as narco terrorists? That will be very convenient for them, because once they are narco terrorists, the militias will come in, because that's not how you dismantle organized crime. Other actors will come in. It's not about removing an actor, because there are plenty of substitution. But in any case, Trump offered assistance for intervention. And what is the MAGA strategy for Latin America? Look, this is about Trump applying extrajudicial abilities to go in other countries. This has nothing to do with tackling drug trafficking.
I mean, also, just to clarify too, like it resulted in 135 deaths, right?
I will go into that. Yes, I will definitely go into that. What was this really about? It's a massacre. It's
because none of them
killings. Yes. So
none of them were faced trial. None of them were charged.
No, and they probably won't. So what is this about? This is about Trump applying the Alien Act and anti-terrorism legislation, which have extraterritorial reach, no due process, and exploit uninformed public commotion, because nobody wants drug dealing. Of course, we don't want them. That's how he intends to create a legal basis to attack Venezuela, by abusing the Aliens Act. So Trump is expanding his policy across the entire continent. And this year, the Trump administration signed an executive order creating a mechanism to classify drug cartels as so-called foreign terrorist organizations, FTOs, and especially designated global terrorists, SDGT. So these are legal definitions. And declaring a national emergency due to the threat of drug cartels. He's creating an exception from the law so he can intervene as he wishes. So under this process, State Department designated 8 cartels in Mexico, Salvador, and Venezuela as FTOs and SDGTs. So this executive order is central for the MAGA strategy of creating the enemy as a terrorist. So now Trump can invoke a law from 1798, the Alien Enemies Act, granting him the president extraordinary powers to evade Congress control and to become a war. And that's how he attacked Venezuela lately, using this order, executive order, and the Aliens Act. Now he's pushing Brazil to categorize those drug cartels as enemies, as terrorists, who put a target in Brazil that US can intervene. And this show is made to create momentum for a legislation in Brazil that will categorize these both drug cartels as narco-terrorism. Is to create the legal ground for US invasion. That's why you need a massacre, because you need to say, look what happened in the favelas of Rio. Look, we need help. We can't control this, because this is what Claudio Castro went to say, the governor of Rio went to say in the press. We can't control them. The federal government didn't help us. Later, he had to admit it was a lie. So he wants to create a situation that Brazil is incapable of dealing with drug trafficking, a commotion, he being elected.
How did he do that? Like, he murdered essentially 135 people without due process. They're not being charged. We don't even know who they are. And they got killed by these supposed the police, the drug squads, whatever.
Let me explain the operational.
How did that? I mean, how does that translate into where it's out of control? Because he's the one who did the killing.
Yeah. So he's saying the first thing he said, it was out of my jurisdiction. This was too much. Well, if it's your out of jurisdiction, you shouldn't go and do it. What he did, he gathered the police, and in one single day, he, friend of Bolsonaro, gathered 2,500 policemen. They flooded Serra da Misericórdia, favela, as a slum, with overwhelming force. It's a military raid. 32 armored vehicles, 2 helicopters, 12 demolition vehicles. The operation lasted the entire day. They killed over 130 residents. We've seen the footage. He left, and the police left 60 bodies abandoned, over 60 bodies abandoned in a forest where they were killed for hours and over a day without investigation, without securing the scene, which they were removed by family members. Imagine you get the news, your son is dead, and then you go along all the residents to try to find, and you see almost 100 bodies, and you start pulling those bodies. There were footage in Brazilian press of they pulling the bodies and lining them up. And the Governor Rio, the far-right governor, has the guts to call it a success operation. Let me tell you something about this. You left 132 people dead. None. Not one single of the, at least until now, 132 people were named in the judicial search warrant or arrest warrant. We had 250 judicial warrants for search and arrest. None of these dead people were named in them. Can you call this a success? To call 132 people that weren't subject to the operation, including 4 police officers? Let me tell you what this is. This is extrajudicial killing of state force for a show to say Brazil is incapable to take care of their own drug dealers. Brazil is incapable of taking care. I'll show you another operation that the federal police did to against a success. I'll contrast this with a success operation. So what happens is the Brazil court classified the operation as a legal massacre. Yeah, completely ineffective at combating drug trafficking, and ordered an investigation. It's against Brazilian constitution, it's against decision of the Supreme Court, and for very good reason they ordered that. You know, they had no legal grounds for such an intervention, and they were operating against a decision of the Supreme Court on the use of force in Islam's specific. It's a specific decision on how police can use force on these lands, because one of the problems in Brazil we have is the ethical cleansing of the population in these lands. Is the Black It's the poor, generally the male, who will suffer those consequences, let alone the stray bullets. 4 people were attacked by straight bullets. You are in your home, you are brushing your teeth, there are straight bullets. If you see the footage of the houses after this savage massacre, I've seen such a thing in Lebanon, like when they left the remains of the civil war. It's the entire wall full, covered in bullet holes. So, and it's so, there is something else. The second thing that the Supreme Court said, there was an obstruction of justice by Governor Castro. The police claim that all cameras, which they have to use, from 2,500 body cameras, all had dead batteries simultaneously. Independent investigation of the Brazil Public Defender's Office. In Brazil, we have a prosecution office and a public defense office. They were blocked. They were physically blocked. And let me tell you something, Ileana, the Brazilian press is the second-grade accomplice in this. The press cover is phenomenal. They call the dead people as drug dealers. Where is the proof? They were not even named as suspect. Not only that, the police falsely claimed that a person on the internet, a man, an unrelated man that didn't even live in Rio, was a dead drug dealer. And then he came on social media, said, I am not drug dealer, I'm alive, and I don't live in Rio. He reclaimed his identity on social media. And they gave little or no voice to the family of the dead. They came on Instagram or social media or international press talking, the Brazilian media, hidden the stories of the people who were victimized by the far-right military raid. And of course, after you propagandize everyone, Folha de São Paulo, which is an accomplice in Brazilian dictatorship, ordered a survey. Let's see what Brazilian people think about this invasion. Are you in favor or are you against? After you create the whole ecosystem, 80%, according to this research, I don't know how accurate it is, 80% of Rio Islam's residents said to be in favor of this ethnical cleansing of the Black and poor. Yeah. And that's why and Claudio Castro reached his maximum approval rate and maximum rejection rate, both of them. So this is what they call Operation Containment, because they want to contain one specific faction, which is called the Red Comment. It's very interesting, isn't it, that you go to a place full of militias, full of factions, and you aim just at one. What's going to happen when you eliminate Red Comment, if you do, because you don't in those things? Well, the PCC will come over and the militias will come over. Do you know how the militias grew in Rio de Janeiro when they started doing raids against the drug trafficking without dismantling the economic structure? Because the militias took the territory. 40% of the Rio de Janeiro city territory belongs to militias, and that is Bolsonaro's heartland. Rio, that's where Bolsonaro comes from. Bolsonaro is son of the militias. The Brazil ultra-right run a test of authoritarian tactics before the next presidential elections. You know, it signals what is coming: state violence, extrajudicial killings, the consolidation of power through terror, while maintaining democratic facades. Well, I don't know, for some people maybe. So let me contrast. In August this year, there was an operation called Hidden Carbon against another cartel, the PCC. This is a actual São Paulo born cartel, but it's everywhere now. We had 0 deaths. It was a coordination between Federal Revenue Service, Federal Police, São Paulo Military Police, and another force called GACO. They blocked 7.6 billion reais in tax evasion, 3.2 billion in they blocked assets, and they identified a 40 billion in investment schemes with assets of 30 billion controlled by the organized crime. That's how you strangle the organized crime, by strangle their financial economy, structure, and dismantle their infrastructure. And you know where they were? They were at Faria Lima. Faria Lima is the Wall Street of South America. They already infiltrated on the financial system. They are not in the slums, Ileana. They are not with the poor people in the slums.
They're making so much money. Why would they be in the slums?
Yeah, they are not there. They were, yeah.
So I do have a question about this because it's confusing to me to think about, because we know I don't know that much, but I know Lula is the president, and that's the left part of the political party. So what is their response to this?
So their response was to initiate investigations, to ask for investigations to be initiated. So Lula went to Rio, got a plane, went to Rio with a commission to investigate. You know, they have responded, this is a state massacre, this is unconstitutional, and you have done this outside your competency. And we are gonna look into that, and if we make these people may be punished. It will be probably a long way until they are punished, and they have an electoral win. That's the problem. And I think what also comes about, it's very interesting because Castro is a government that maintained a very low profile, but now his profile is coming up. And you know what? He himself is connected to the Red Commons. Oh, what a surprise. Yeah, it's a direct connection. So Governor Claudio, far right, and ally of Bolsonaro, is connected to a state representative called T.H. Joyas. He is a former deputy of the state of Rio de Janeiro, and he was arrested in September for being the major weapons suppliers to the Red Command, who Claudio Castro claims to dismantle. Look, if you go on social media, you see an array of pictures, friendly pictures with T.H. Joyas and Castro, okay? The governor, of course, denied having close connections with T.H. Joyas, his name. But T.H. Joyas was a state deputy who used his position. The claims are he used his position to facilitate arms trafficking, and he was the red color representative of the Red Command in the Rio Assembly, and he was acting as a political link for the faction in the northern areas of the city. Yeah, and according to investigations, he laundered money. He lived in a luxury condominium, Rio condo, of course. He had several luxury cars, used anti-tank equipment to hide, to hinder police operations in territories controlled by the Red Command. Yeah. And he maintained relationships with the Red Command leaders in communities. In Complexo do Alemão, Maré, Cidade de Deus. Complexo do Alemão is where the raid happened. Look at that. So it's very interesting because right after T.H. Joyas was arrested, Castro declared that no, there was no infiltration of organized crime into politics in Rio de Janeiro. I fully deny that. How can you deny it in front of so many facts? Reality beats it all. You know, the facts are speaking. But you see an array of pictures of him arrested with weapons, with weapons trafficking, circulate a lot of Israeli trafficking. And you see a lot of pictures of Castro with T.H. Joyas throughout the years. They go to watch football games together. Flamengo is their team of the heart, you know. And you know who else is a friend of T.H. Joyas? Guess.
Bolsonaro.
Senator Flávio Bolsonaro, son of Jair Bolsonaro. He's seen the footage hugging, kissing in Rio de Janeiro with T.H. Joyas. Do you think that the ultra-right in Brazil grow from the organized crime? That's what we need to see. And this is the MAGA strategy, you know. Let me tell you what Flávio Bolsonaro did. It's very interesting. He gave national security dossiers to Trump, Marco Rubio, and attempting to convince the US to classify these factions in Rio, and told Trump to invade the government to find attacks against narco traffickers. So he was asking for military intervention when Trump attacked Venezuela. He said, "I'm jealous. I wish Trump would attack Brazil in the same fashion." But let me show a picture. Let me show a video to the audience of what Claudio Castro was doing. Let me just find this video. What Claudio Castro, after that many people.
He massacred 132 people.
Yeah, let's see what he's done after he massacred the people. This is Governor Bill Claudio.
This is at a church, right?
He's in the church. Look at that, with his family. Right after, he's saying, "Baby Jesus, help him." What's possible?
It's just so horrific. Okay, so I just want to say one last thing before we.
Well, I have another video I really would like to share with you and the audience.
Okay, sorry.
Also, right after the massacre, this is how Claudio Castro was. What we have here, how he was received in the.
Yeah, so I mean, as you can see, he's like still very popular amongst at least this constituency, this church-going constituency. It's really horrific. And I have to say one thing before we actually invite Carlos on stage, because he's actually here in the studio with us, and I'm very excited to shift over to that news. But one thing, I think one of my big takeaways from what you're saying is that this is how US puppets work. You see, the actual right-wing faction in Brazil is also benefiting from the association with the US. And so they're inviting the US imperialist agenda into the country because they personally have a self-interest.
Okay. The guy in blue is Bolsonaro's son, and this is the drug dealer. This is Bolsonaro's son here with TH Jules. But carry on, yeah.
I mean, they're so blatant about it, but they think that the population of the Brazil and the overall, they have the cover of the US empire. So they think they're protected internationally. And then they feel like they have the capture of the Brazilian population, that they will believe anything they say, essentially. It's quite horrific, but this is actually the extent of the corruption of US puppets around the world. And this is not an isolated case. It's just extremely horrific that we're seeing, the events that we're seeing unfolding, but it's certainly not isolated. And it's part of the way that things work. It's not unusual to have this sort of back and forth.
No, this is TH being arrested and the government of Rio de Janeiro with him. Just to make sure everything we're saying here is, look at that. Yeah, they were good friends. TH joyous. That's what we're talking about. And as you brilliantly said, they feel they have the back from their associations with US far right. That's the extent of the empire. I think it's a brilliant analysis.
It's horrible. Thank you so much for clarifying that, Sarah. I have to admit, I had no idea what was going on. It was very confusing to me. So thank you for that. And I am really excited that we are going to let on the stage, once I can figure that out, Carlos Martinez. So let me just bring him up here. Hello. I think you are on.
We're live. How are you doing? Hey, Sara, ¿cómo está você?
Hi, Carlos. It's very nice to have you here. Hola, buenas tardes.
Good to see you guys.
I feel very inferior because we have multilinguists in the house right now. And I only really know English and a bit of Chinese, a little bit. Okay. But shifting over to why we have you here, Carlos, we have you here to help us understand everything that happened. Well, not everything, because we don't have 5 hours. But the recent Trump and Xi Jinping meeting in South Korea, what that tells us about geopolitics in general and the difference between the US and China. But again, to just introduce Carlos Martinez is a researcher, political activist from the UK, and author of the book, The East is Still Red, Chinese Socialism in the 21st Century. He is a co-founder and co-editor of Friends of Socialist China and co-founder of No Cold War. Welcome, Carlos.
Hey guys, honored to be on with you. Your first live guest.
Yes, you are.
Amazing. Thank you so much for wading into these uncharted waters with us. Just to start, actually, Sarah, do you want to start?
No, I would like you to start first. Well, okay, I will start. So Chinese president, I don't know how to speak it in English. Xi, how do you say it?
You can say Xi.
Xi Jinping, I will say how we do it here, met with President Donald Trump in Busan. Trump said it was amazing. He's a good friend. It's a 12 out of 10. All those hyperbolic, emotional, I don't know the depth of it. But in any case, it was now in South Korea on the 3rd of October and was the first meeting between the two leaders since Trump returned to office. Can you give us an overall takeaways from this meeting which by most accounts has been reported as positive? Is it positive? And what is the difference between what was in display between the US and the Chinese leadership, how they displayed differently, they commented differently? So your overall opinion, both of them.
Yeah. I think I'm kind of cautiously optimistic and positive about the whole thing. And the consensus seems to be reading analysis pretty much across the board, in the Western mainstream media, in the financial press, the Financial Times, and then the Guardian and New York Times, and going up, and then including Chinese media and political analysis on the left. I think the consensus is basically that while all the issues weren't necessarily resolved, and we haven't, sadly, brought an end to the tariff war altogether, there is at least some kind of truce. And what you've really got is essentially a return to the status quo ante, what you had before Trump launched this tariff war earlier this year. So, the US has agreed to reduce its tariffs. I don't think we've got the exact figures on that, but they've massively de-escalated their import tariffs on Chinese goods.
The only figure so far, right, is like 47%.
Right.
10%. It's a 10% from 47.
From 57 to 47, but I don't know what the Chinese side are doing.
Yeah, so the highest it reached was 145% a few months back, and then Trump had been threatening the reimposition of 100% tariffs. But anyway, so not 100% sure what the figures are now, but they're much lower, and obviously China will reciprocate with similar level of reduced tariffs. China's paused its restrictions on rare earth exports for 1 year. It seems that some of the restrictions on US exports of semiconductors are going to be lifted, at least temporarily. And China said that it will restart buying US soybeans. Hopefully, Sara, that doesn't cause a problem for the Brazilian economy, because I think Brazilian agribusiness has been the big winner in this whole...
I would love to stop exporting soya, because it destroys one of the major biomass, which is the Cerrado soy.
Right. But essentially, as I say, we're back where things were before Trump started off this tariff war. And the US administration has got essentially nothing of what it was aiming to achieve. It was trying to force major concessions from China. It was trying to impose essentially, an unequal treaty on China, the sort of thing that was imposed on China between 1840 and 1949, during the Century of Humiliation, under which China would buy trillions of dollars worth of US products that it doesn't need, and that China would give the US tariff-free access to its markets while accepting US tariffs on Chinese goods, and while accepting, a deepening of this US semiconductor war that was initiated by Biden and that's been deepened by Trump, the idea of which is to strangle China's technological development and to prevent it from becoming sort of a technological superpower, if you will. So, and that's a really important part of all of this is the semiconductor and the modern technology, digital technology side of things, because really the only areas, US manufacturing has more or less disappeared over the last 40, 50 years. The only areas where the US economy is still competitive in like industry and in terms of the production of actual physical things is high-end computing and of course the military industrial complex. So the US has been looking for ways to retain that lead in the digital economy by suppressing China's development, using these illegal means of unilateral sanctions and export controls, essentially using a Tonya Harding approach to economic competition, and to bypass the fact that actually China's economic system and Chinese socialism is proving its superiority. And it was more than 40 years ago that Chinese then paramount leader Deng Xiaoping said that the superiority of the socialist system is demonstrated by faster and greater development of the productive forces than under the capitalist system, and we're really seeing that now. China is going far out in front on so many areas of the economy, whilst the US is slowing down and is stagnating, much like the rest of the West. So,
why do you think on the rare earth, which would be break down the entire supply chain for the military, the US, why do you think China agreed and put a pause on that policy?
So first things, just to clarify for the audience what the significance of rare earths is. Rare earth metals are very important components in a pretty vast array of modern technologies, including smartphones, including batteries, including electric vehicles, also medical equipment, MRI machines and stuff like that. And also, of course, famously, military materials, fighter jets, precision missiles, etc. And China completely dominates this whole global rare earths market. It represents, I think, 80% to 90% of processing capacity, highly efficient supply chain, very strong in processing and in refining, and that whole process of refinement has got a very, very high technical threshold, and China's been working on that for decades, right? No other country comes close in terms of its capacity for production, its capacity for refining, and in terms of its economies of scale, like its cost effectiveness. So that's sort of the context, just in case it's helpful. And China introduced these export restrictions, which were not an export ban, but restrictions aimed at, in line with China's international obligations around weapons proliferation, aimed at upholding its international obligations, essentially as a countermeasure to the US tariffs and to the US export controls on semiconductors. So, of course, every reasonable person, the three of us, all peace-loving people in the world, would be very happy if those restrictions would just carry on forever. But from China's point of view, China would actually like to end the tariff war, as soon as possible. The tariff war wasn't China's choice, and they've always been very clear. We don't want a tariff war, but we're not afraid of it. We'll fight it. We're not going to accept unequal treaties being imposed upon us, but we would like to negotiate, and we would like to come to a mutually agreeable arrangement that works for both sides, and that works for the whole world, and that feeds into the stability of the global economy. So I think in a context where the US is offering some concessions, and the US is offering to reduce its tariffs and is offering to reduce its export controls on semiconductors, I think it would be difficult for China to justify continuing with those export controls. And I don't think the US would give those concessions if China didn't also make concessions. That essentially that's been used as leverage to bring Donald Trump to the negotiating table in the first place. And plus, it could be considered as a unilateral sanction, which, as you know, is not actually legal under international law. So much as we would all like to see the immediate universal dismantling of the military-industrial complex, I think it has to be seen within the context of this tariff war, and China's playing its cards.
Right, and I think it's worth saying that the reason why they were so the export controls were so, I think, somewhat surprising to the U.S. side was that they mirrored the semiconductor sanctions that the U.S. put on China. I mean, ironically, the U.S. is like that. They will do something, and then they'll be shocked if no one else can do the equal thing. But basically, the semiconductor, the thing about it that's significant is the secondary sanctions that are embedded into the controls, which, China did with the rare earth minerals. And like you said rightly, that I was very hopeful about, maybe naively, because like you said, it's part, they haven't been untangled just yet. And also, I think the other thing to clarify is that there were two export license restrictions that were announced this year. The first one being the April 2025 ones, which also had dual purpose, dual use export license restrictions. Now that is the license restrictions that is really alarming the US, because the dual use export license, that is the one that deals with military weaponry, etc. And that's the one that would be greatly restricted. So there were some that were announced in April, and there were some that were announced in October 9th. But the postponement of 1 year is only for October 9th, right? So can you help us understand what this actually means in real terms, or as much as you can?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on rare earths or the export controls. But what it seems to me is a sort of managed and reciprocal climb down, and the whole thing really demonstrates the differences in overall orientation between the two sides when it comes to this whole conflict. If you look at what Xi Jinping said in the press conference after the meeting, he said that the whole world is confronted with these many tough problems, and that our two countries, China and the US, can jointly shoulder our responsibility as major countries and work together to accomplish more great and concrete things for the good of our two countries and the whole world, right? So these are very much the words and the sentiments of a statesperson. He said, we've got no intention to challenge or supplant anyone. Our focus is on, and has always been on, managing China's own affairs well, improving ourselves and sharing development opportunities with all countries across the world. So he's presenting this very kind of measured, reasonable approach, which is just such a clear contrast to the US's aggression and its confrontation, its recklessness, and the message is getting through. And I think it's really disrupting the other aspect of this tariff war, which from the US's point of view was to just bully other countries into siding with the US against China. Actually, because of China's reason and its measured response, countries around the world see China as a responsible partner that's interested in mutual benefit, that's interested in respect for sovereignty, that pursues non-interference, that pursues shared development and common prosperity. And the easing of rare earth restrictions is part of that, because it shows that China's not it's not a reckless power. It's not kind of, it positions itself very much within international law, within the principles of the United Nations Charter, and acts in a responsible way. And the result of that is that even countries that have traditionally been in the US orbit, are increasingly more attracted towards working closely with China. Look at India. I think the New York Times said a couple of months ago that Trump is pushing India back towards China. the US has put incredible effort into
incredible.
driving a wedge between those countries, right? But now you had, at the end of August, Narendra Modi going to China for the first time in 7 years for the summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in Tianjin. Direct flights have been resumed between China and India for the first time in many years. Even Canada is kind of making approaches towards China now to improve the trade relationship. The ASEAN countries, obviously there was the APEC summit around the fringes of which Trump and Xi Jinping had their meeting. The APEC summit agreed, an upgraded regional free trade agreement with China. So China's been playing this very patient game. It's been described in a couple of articles recently as in Gramscian terms, as a war of position. And, it's succeeding. It's continuing to strengthen its relationships with the other countries of the world, including, by the way, in the context of a tariff war, giving complete tariff-free access on every single product line to all least developed countries, including, I think, 32 or 33 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. It still maintains a large trade surplus, running at around the rate of $1 trillion a year, even though it's exporting much less to the US than it has been doing. And it's been able to do that through years and years of diversifying its trade relationships and its supply chains. It's making progress on its own semiconductors. The whole idea of semiconductor export controls from the US was to prevent China's rise as a technological and digital superpower. Actually, all they've done, and this is so often the effect of sanctions, is to kind of foment a renewed drive within China itself to develop its own domestic semiconductor industry, which is proving very successful. China's economy is still growing, at a rate of 5% per year, far higher than any major Western economy. Wages are rising rapidly. People are living increasingly well. If you've gone to China, you'll see the infrastructure is like light years ahead of the United States. So, all in all, I think, as I said, China doesn't want a tariff war, but it's been able to weather this storm extremely well. And what the summit between Xi and Trump represents is, more than anything, a climb down by the US.
I think that's a really good
Carlos,
point.
China is often viewed.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Ileana, go ahead.
No, go
I have a
ahead.
delay.
Go ahead, Sarah.
I'm having a delay here, so we stumble with each other. But you wanted to comment. I'll ask my question after that.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Yeah, I was just going to say it's a really good point that you're making there, Carlos, about the emphasis on international law, because again, that is definitely something that Western media uses against China to say, like, oh, well, China doesn't care about international law, doesn't care about any laws, that type of thing. And like Xi Jinping has mentioned the UN Charter, has mentioned international law in almost every major announcement down, the Global Governance Initiative, the Global AI Plan, Action Plan. I mean, all this references the UN and international law. So I think that's a really good point as to why they won't, even though we want it. It's like, it's easy to want, like, we want an easy fix. We want an easy solution. Stop the US empire. Stop it now. Go, China, go. But the fact of the matter is they're very conscious too. They're not going to do this like short-term thinking. They're thinking long-term. What is the world going to look like in a multilateral sense? If they just did that, what happens to the world order? It's like, it's disrupted. So yeah, thank you for that. I didn't think about it properly. So thanks, Carlos. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, so Carlos, China is often viewed as either imperialist power to the US, or then it's seen a passive bystander, not doing enough, stop Israeli, US, British genocide in Palestine, or is not doing enough to help Venezuela against the US. It's very difficult for outsiders to understand China's foreign policy. It's really difficult to grasp. It's almost invisible moves. I don't know. So I want you to talk about that. How to explain this to us? And also, if you can talk about the forthcoming compilation from Friends of Socialist China, China Changes Everything.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's a quite interesting narrative because China is kind of getting more visibility, and I think it's increasingly attractive, and people are increasingly interested in what's going on in China. And as a result of China's objective progress, and also the fact that people have got a bit more exposure to China, more people are visiting China, influencers are visiting China, people using the red notes, Xiaohongshu, and things like that. And as a result of that, having some sort of grassroots people-to-people engagement with Chinese people, and they're seeing, the amazing infrastructure in Chongqing or in Shanghai or whatever, and they're seeing what China's doing in relation to renewable energy, which is very difficult to hide. At a point where a single country is responsible for 50% of all renewable energy production in the world, then that's something that's pretty interesting, right? But so that's a positive thing. But people, some people have sort of jumped from that, saying, oh, China's doing interesting things, to basically assuming that China can just rule the world in a benevolent way, and just that it's got access to a magic wand that it can solve humanity's problems, which it kind of doesn't, right?
Oh no.
And
he's freezing.
Oh, sorry.
You're back.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, China is not a hegemon. China doesn't have a plan to become a hegemon, doesn't have the ability to become a hegemon. And, we kind of need to incorporate this small matter of material reality. China doesn't actually have the ability to project its power globally in the way that the United States does, right? The United States has got its 800 military bases, it's got its military alliances, its NATO and its AUKUS and its quadrilateral security dialogue. It's got its deployment of tens of thousands of weapons around the world. It's got its deployment of tens of thousands of troops around the world. So China, doesn't have that means of power projection that it can just, solve these.
China doing more against the genocide? Shouldn't they be doing more?
Right. Well, I'm coming to that. China's foreign policy is very, very strongly based on, the principles of the UN Charter, as we've talked about, on international law, on the principle of respect for sovereignty, non-interference, mutual benefit, and global, sustainable development, all the things that are kind of built into international law, which the US and its allies willfully ignore. And that's kind of the importance of international law, and the importance of the UN and the Charter is that all of these, the UN system isn't perfect, but the world would be a much better and a peaceful and a more prosperous place if the imperialist countries actually worked within that framework. China can't send troops to Gaza. Now, controversially, China doesn't impose sanctions on Israel. And that's something a lot of people complain about. And I think, in many senses, it's a legitimate complaint. It's not within my gift to determine China's foreign policy, but, it does have a very good, reason. It does have a very good rationale and justification for not imposing unilateral sanctions on Israel, because unilateral sanctions are illegal, right? For a sanction to be legal, it has to run through the United Nations Security Council. And if China imposed unilateral sanctions on Israel, it wouldn't be justified. It wouldn't have a justification for opposing the US and Europe's and Canadian and Australian unilateral sanctions on Cuba or on Venezuela or on Iran or on the Democratic People's Republic of Korea or Nicaragua or Zimbabwe or Eritrea, etc., etc. Unfortunately, I could go on. So in terms of what China has done materially for Gaza, which I think is limited in terms of its scope of operation and action, but it has from the very beginning called for, demanded at the UN General Assembly and Security Council an immediate and comprehensive ceasefire and an immediate and comprehensive withdrawal by Israel from Gaza. It's in terms of developing the Palestinian National Project and developing Palestinian national unity. It brought the 14 biggest Palestinian factions together in Beijing last year, including Fatah, including Hamas, including Palestinian Islamic Jihad, including the PFLP and the DFLP. It brought them together in Beijing, producing a Beijing Declaration, which is about kind of a united post-war governance in Gaza, which was actually a very important contribution. It's interesting that it's only China that's able to do that. China maintains very good relations with all the resistance factions, and it's saying, on the basis of its own experience, China's own experience, and the experience of the Communist Party of China, you're not going to achieve anything. You're never going to have stability, and you're never going to win your legitimate national rights if you don't have the highest possible level of unity. So that's actually an important material contribution. Chinese representatives have spoken out at the International Court of Justice in support of the right of colonized peoples to armed resistance against occupation, which in many ways is quite a bold thing to do. And meanwhile, and this is like Ileana, you and I were talking about.
In the UK, you can get arrested for that, right? In the UK, if you claim that, in the UK or the US, if you claim, like for our Asian and Brazilian audience, if in the UK, in the US, if you claim that colonized people, according to UN Charter, have the right to resist, including armed, you can be charged as a.
There's a certain.
Yeah.
We definitely can't say anything about Hamas here in the UK at all. So, yeah. But yeah, just for disclaimer, for people to know, watching as well, that is actually a real thing.
This is really big that China takes this stand, that China sits down with I think it's 12 resistance group, at least that I know of, in Palestine, and acknowledge their right to resist. In the UK, you can get charged not by any law, but by the terrorist law. We have a friend, Richard Medhurst, who is being investigated and indicted in 2 different countries here in Europe, UK and US. And we know many others which the anti-terrorist police entered journalist homes in the UK, raided them. Sara Wilkinson, they dropped the ashes of her mom on the floor and seized her phone, seized her passport, pretended didn't seize her passport, which would be an offense not to hand it in. So in the UK, we have a war on terror on people that speak for Palestinian right to resist. Just a brief disclaimer for our audience. So it's big. This is big what China is doing in our perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, very true, and full solidarity with Richard Medhurst, full solidarity with Sara Wilkinson, and everyone else that's been targeted. Literally hundreds and hundreds of predominantly older people, pensioners, who've been arrested for holding up signs saying we oppose genocide, we oppose, we support Palestine action. This is an unbelievable and pretty unprecedented level of repression in a supposedly democratic country. But yes, the other thing I just wanted to quickly say about the whole China and Gaza dynamic, and Ileana, you and I have discussed this briefly in relation to Danny Haifeng's article, which we republished on the Friends of Socialist China website a couple of days ago. There's an element of kind of like diversion there, because like we're projecting the problem onto China, whereas in reality it's the Western countries, and particularly the US, that's responsible for all of this. Israel is essentially a proxy of US imperial interests. The US provides something like 60 or 70% of Israel's arms, of the actual weapons that are being used to kill tens of thousands of innocent people in Gaza. With Britain not very far behind, with Italy not very far behind. So it's our countries that have actually got the power to put a stop to this, disgraceful, disgusting injustice and massacre. The onus should be on these countries, and our focus as progressive and decent human beings that support national liberation in the West should be on opposing our own governments and forcing them to change track. And just you asked me about the book China Changes Everything as well, which I think has just been released a few days ago. Basically, Friends of Socialist China has a US committee as of about a year ago, and that committee's taken the initiative to put together this compiled volume about Chinese socialism, China's foreign policy, the new Cold War, China's role in an emerging multipolar world order, and so on. And that's got chapters from Gerald Horne, Pavel Vargan, Margaret Kimberley, Jackie Luqman, Radhika Desai, KJ No, Ken Hammond, Dee Knight, myself, Keith Bennett, Kyle Farana, and several other people. So yeah, have a look online. I think you can get the PDF and you can buy a physical copy.
Okay, so I will track down that link, and I'll put it under in the description of this clip. Thank
Awesome.
you, Carla. I want to read it, so I'm excited about that. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, thank you for that overview. Some more things to think about, I think, for people. Oh, I did want to ask you one more question. I know we're like running so long. Of course, it's our first live. Do you have time for one more question, Carlos?
Sure.
Okay, sorry about that. So this is it's because I'm Malaysian too, not to be so like I said, egocentric, like we were talking about the Americans. But, Trump boasted of 2 trade deals, when he went to Asia. Apparently the longest trip to Asia in his return to the White House, 6 days. And he boasted that he made trade deals with Malaysia and Cambodia. Obviously, I'm Malaysian, so I really want to know about that, because Malaysia had a trade deal with China as well, I think a few days after at the APEC. So could you kind of talk us through that, or what do you think about it? I'm personally worried about how much economic coercion is being exerted over Malaysia, because Malaysia, like most Southeast Asian countries, has to really balance this tightrope of, what would be in their self-interest would be to work with China, but they have to also appease the US. So could you help us break that down a little bit?
Sure. I mean, to be honest, you've said most of what needed to be said. But yeah, so the US announced that Malaysia's going to get rid of, or at least reduce, tariffs on pretty much all US products. And it's also, they've said that Malaysia will recognize US regulatory oversight. So, the US can export its agricultural products, say, don't worry, this stuff is safe, you don't have to regulate it, and Malaysia will accept that. Similar deal with Cambodia in terms of eliminating tariffs and agreeing to exclusive US regulatory oversight. The Malaysians have said that they'll buy, I think it's $3 billion worth annually of US liquid natural gas, which is an ecological absurdity, right? Malaysia and the United States are not very far away, and we're talking about a fossil fuel which is produced through hydraulic fracturing, or commonly known as fracking. They're drilling up to a mile below ground, releasing tons of methane, which is a much, much stronger greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide is, into the atmosphere. And then they liquefy this gas, this shale gas. To liquefy it, you have to cool it to minus 100 degrees centigrade, and then you put it on container ships and take it across the Pacific Ocean. So it's actually, it's a crazy thing to do. A crazy way for Malaysia to meet its energy needs in an era where we should all be going renewable energy, and cooperating with China around renewable energy production is just such an obvious. It's a much more cost-effective and a much more environmentally friendly option. But anyway,
I think Petronas as well. We have we have Petronas. It's like we have oil, so it's also confusing. Okay, but go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, these are multi-year agreements that have been made with Petronas. The Malaysia's even agreed to buy US coal, which is which is a whole different level.
That doesn't sound good to us at all.
No, it doesn't sound great. And then there's a memorandum of understanding around rare earths. So the US is trying to diversify its suppliers of rare earths. And they announced a deal with Australia recently that they're going to up their investment in Australia rare earth metals, and now they want to do that with Malaysia as well. I mean, Malaysia may have decent supplies of rare earths, but the issue with rare earths isn't just finding those raw materials, isn't just like getting some metals from under the ground, but it's purifying them and it's processing them, which, as I said earlier, has got an extremely high technical threshold. And China's really, China's been working on it for a long time. It's the only one that can do that. Any other country is going to be minimum 20 years behind. So you can have all the deals with Malaysia and Australia you like, you're not actually going to solve your problems. And that continues to be a significant lever that China's got. So, what does Malaysia get in return? What does Cambodia get in return? They get a reduction on the tariffs. So I think it's down to 19% in both cases. And you have to remember, at the end of the day, both of these countries are really feeling the pain of the trade war. Not every country can do what China does. China's a massive country. China's the largest trading partner of about 3/4 of the countries in the world, right? Or at least 2/3 of the countries in the world. So China can diversify its trading partner. Okay, the US has imposed 100% tariffs on us. We'll just export whatever we need to export to any of the other 150 countries that we've got extremely good trading relationships with. And we don't want to buy US soybeans, we'll buy Brazilian soybeans, et cetera, et cetera. So China has got levers that not every country can pull, and Malaysia and Cambodia, along with Mexico and Canada and other countries, they're really they're on the front line of this whole trade war. They don't have the same capacity as China, so it was kind of to be expected, I think, that they would be willing to make some sort of concessions in order to regain access to the US market, which is still, in spite of whatever stagnation in the US economy, the US is still, I think, far and away the largest kind of high-end consumer market. It's a very important market. So, and as you said, Ileana, Malaysia and Cambodia as well are both, they don't want to be part of a new Cold War. They don't want to take sides. They don't want to engage in bloc politics. Both try very hard to maintain good relations with the US and with the West and with China and with Russia. And they're certainly not about to sacrifice their relations with China. Malaysia and Cambodia are both part of China's Belt and Road Initiative. They're both working on, enormous infrastructure projects together. Both countries are politically close to China. So, I wouldn't worry too much about the fact that they've made some concessions. I don't think they have a choice about making concessions. That's unfortunate situation that's been brought about by the recklessness of moribund and declining US capitalism. And as Gramsci put it, the old world is dying and the new world is yet to be born, and now is the time of monsters. Well, now is the time of monsters. And
I'm going to be polemic now. If I think the garages that people have in the US full of stuff, they must buy a whole lot. They must be part of a huge market, even if they are dying empire. The consumerism, how this society is structuring the consumerism, and I think this is part of the problem, why they need to produce so much as well, because it's insatiable. If you see the hoarders in America, at least in TV, is what we get, like TV shows on people hoarding things, and even the average America having 2-3 garages to put things that they cannot live without, but they don't use them. So I think when you have a society that is so focused on this type of activities, how do you feel this emptiness? You don't. And then I think I would say this is one of the problems here in this equation. And that's why they need to buy so much. They need to get someone, let's go to Malaysia, let's go to Brazil. We need to have a cup of coffee in Starbucks. This is this size. And the can of milk is this size. Can we just not consume less and leave others alone?
Capitalism. That is the problem with capitalism.
Yeah. Well, it's important to recognize that there is a significant layer of the working class in the United States which doesn't live a nice consumer lifestyle, especially among, minority and oppressed communities, which live in increasingly, global South conditions. And then, this whole consumerism mania has really been built on the back of debt, for one thing, and then offshoring, neoliberal globalization, and the debt bubble is really bursting. That was never going to be sustainable, and we're seeing the results of that now. And the whole neoliberal globalization and financialization and this whole structure of the modern capitalist economy it's run out of roads. We're in a pretty serious and chronic long-term economic crisis of overproduction, of productivity, profitability, and the US ruling class doesn't, and the Western ruling class in general don't have answers to that. There's no solutions to this problem, and that's why they're hitting out in such kind of reckless ways and aggressive ways. That's why we're seeing the level of conflict that we're seeing. Crazy activities like an unwinnable war in Ukraine against Russia, or a genocide in Gaza, or this tariff war, or new Cold War, and this escalation of encirclement and containment against China. So, China's rising, the global South is rising. We're moving towards a multipolar era, but it's not going to be an easy journey.
Right. Well, thank you so much for that, Carlos. And thank you for giving so much of your time to our first ever live.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, really appreciate your time.
Do you speak Spanish, Carlos? Because I would like to bring you also in our Brazilian show. This is the time you can say, no, I don't speak Spanish.
Pues, más o menos. No hablo con una seguridad total, pero sí.
Okay, yeah, good.
Okay, cool.
You in?
All right. Yeah, okay. So now I'm going to remove you. It feels weird to remove. Okay. But there you go.
Sorry. It was an amazing interview. I think it clarified to me a lot about
China. That was wonderful from Carlos. Like, how amazing to kick off our weekly live with such a great guest. We are at an hour and 48 minutes, and we haven't actually gotten through half of our stories, Sarah. I don't know what to say about that.
Let's just carry on.
But yes,
let's carry on. It's okay. We can have an hour show, a 4-hour show. For me, it's fine. I think we should just deliver what we promised. Maybe it was too big a promise, too many things. We didn't know we had so much to talk about. We both get excited and very talkative, but you people can watch later the segments of its section. I think we should carry on. We're
over
understanding how this all works. Yeah.
Instead of under delivering and over promising, we have under promised and over delivered. So here we are. We're still going, and also we do have to continue because we haven't even gotten to our stories that everyone should be talking about yet. Our segment. So I guess.
So we need to talk about Sudan, right? The genocide in Sudan. It's impressive how such a pervert genocide is inexistent in the press. I think it's shocking, Ileana, that nobody comments about Africa. Africa is invisible by all means, even if a genocide has been carried out. And I think the only justice we can do to these people is to tell their stories and to dismantle the US propaganda in this another genocide. But what can you tell us about what is actually happening in Sudan if people knows nothing?
Yeah. Okay. So I had to look this up too, because if you look at the headlines, I mean, actually the latest headlines right now is talking about how the Quad mediators, US-led Quad mediators, have supposedly brokered a ceasefire in Sudan. The way that they're sort of framing it, actually, let me just show you some of these headlines before breaking it down. So essentially, they're sort of framing it like the U.S. is brokering this big peace ceasefire. Trump ends another war. Like, oh my God, Trump is the peace president. This is all completely bullshit, as usual, as we can imagine. the US, of course, was instrumental in creating the conditions for this civil war. And it is a genocide. I would say it's a genocide, but it's from two factions that are, it's not about indigenous people or sovereign people fighting against an imperialist force. Unfortunately, it seems to be about two foreign-backed entities fighting, and of course, the people that are suffering are the local people. Yeah, in Sudan. So, but to break it down,
like a two-front colonization. Can we put this way, a two-front colonization on Sudan?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could, but it's like it is like a military and a resource grab from two factions that are actually, they're not opposing forces in the overall U.S. empire, which is one of the reasons why people get very confused about what U.S. empire is, because even within the infrastructure of the empire, there are factions that do have power struggles and fight it out for different reasons. And we'll go into that because I think it is important, again, to orientate this about colonialism previously and imperialism now, and why it's so important really for us to be talking about these issues and the propaganda and stuff like that. Because
so I think you were hinting on divide and rule, the classic divide and rule, get the internal conflicts, make them, arm them, and let them fight.
Well, yeah, I guess you're right. And then at the end of the day, you kind of still have backing from these foreign entities, but you don't, it becomes another thing. Like, it's not like one entity, the US empire, is just controlling these puppets for their own specific, very efficient reason. You know what I mean? It's not really like that. And that's why we have to think about US empire in those terms, is that they're not that competent. It's just that they have so much money, right? And they have so much infrastructure and they have so much military that it's like inevitably they might reach their agenda, but through a very, very chaotic way. And that's basically what's happening here. Unfortunately, though, we're looking at massive amounts of casualties. And casualties might be the wrong word here, but death. So it is a genocide. And I think one of the images that we had like over the week was the satellite imagery of the genocide that you could actually see from space. And it was just like so horrific. We can't actually even show it on here, but you can definitely look that up. But so I just want to break down the headlines of this supposed ceasefire so that we can sort of get on the same page and understand what's happening. It's being described as a humanitarian truce that has broken by the US, like I'm saying. However, there's an issue with this because, first of all, it's just a humanitarian truce, not a real ceasefire. The SAF, which is the Sudan Armed Forces, supposedly would be, you would think would be the Sudan Armed Forces. So it would be theirs, and then the RSF. But like I said, the SAF is backed by foreign forces as well. So you have the RSF agreeing to this humanitarian truce, but this is after they have seized control of Al-Fashir city last week, which is the Sudan army's last stronghold. And reports are saying they have control of over a quarter of Sudan. So now they're agreeing to a humanitarian truce, which is, I suppose, like a pause. Like if we can think of Israel agreeing to pauses. There is no mutual agreement because the SAF has refused to endorse the ceasefire, meaning we don't know what the terms are, you know. And then secondly, there's no enforcement mechanism. So how are we even going to know whether or not the ceasefire is in effect? And again, RSF is the entity that is being accused of the genocide. So again, they're deciding to stop. You know what I mean? It's just, it's a very nebulous peace deal. But of course, the humanitarian urgency is like there's already been estimated over 150,000 deaths since 2023 and 12 million to 20 million displaced since the war began in 2023.
It's so entire country. Oh, yeah.
So it's absolutely horrific. Now, if we look at who the US-led Quad is, this is kind of interesting itself because the Quad is the United States, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. And so the Quad mediators are actually the people that are backing the RSF and the SAF, because Egypt is backing the SAF with military aid, strategic coordination, etc. The UAE is backing the RSF, again with arms, logistics, and financial backing. And Israel, which, as we know, is a colonial outpost of the US empire, Israel is backing the RSF with intelligence. So
Ileana, did I get it right that Israel is backing the RSF and the United States is backing the opposition SFA?
Well, it's not like that. No, it's not like that. It's like the USF is backed by Israel intelligence-wise, UAE with military-wise. Now, remember, Israel and UAE both, like UAE is a client state of the US. Israel is a colonial outpost of the US, right? So you're right. But just to clarify, the SAF is being backed by Egypt. Okay, so Egypt is also a client state of the US because Egypt is provided with $1.3 billion annually in military aid. That makes it like the top 3 recipients of military aid from the US. Okay, because remember, of course, Israel was forever the #1 recipient of military aid, but then Ukraine is up there with like 40 billion or something crazy. But really, Israel has been historically #1 military aid recipient from the US. Egypt,
another genocide from Israel that we don't hear about.
Well, it's not from Israel, it's from the US. I mean, I think this is what we have to be clear on.
Yeah.
Israel and the US. Israel is part of the US empire. So Israel is the military outpost in that region. The US pressured Sudan to sign onto the Abraham Accords. What is it called? I don't know where it is right now. The
Abraham.
Yeah, and in 2020, I think it's called that, and that normalized relations with Israel, but and it caused Netanyahu to talk about the military. This area as kind of like their backyard or whatever it is. So it's essentially this Sudan is part of kind of the expansion of Israel. Like Israel is the expansionary force of the US empire in West Asia, in the Middle East. And so this is one of the countries. Sudan was also one of the 5 countries after 9/11 that was on the US radar. Libya, Syria, Sudan was also one of them, Iraq and Iran, right? So that's what we're talking about. Is you're right to say, actually, the US is involved in all factions of this. They're laying the groundwork and the conditions for this type of horror to happen, another genocide by US empire. But of course, the headlines aren't going to reflect that, right? And I have to say that just to sort of sum this up, because I was looking through the headlines and I couldn't really find anything. And then I found this article on Black Agenda Report. A Black Agenda Report is such a great, like, most people should know this outlet. It's, they do great reporting on here. And this is where I learned a little bit more about the factions behind the forces on the ground in Sudan with this reporter, Mustab Baba. And here you can see Sudan. You see Sudan is in such a logistically strategic place, right? Because there's Egypt, Iraq, Iran, but somewhere here that we can't see is Israel, Palestine, right? So Sudan is in this very strategic place. Here it also has gold mines. Like, let's not forget, it also has natural resources. So the gold, of course, UAE is after the gold. The RSF has control over gold mines as well. So it's resources and a geopolitically strategic position in this area. And then like I just wanted to say, so basically this, I'm just going to quote from this article at the end because it pretty much sums it all up. The Sudanese war serves as a tragic analogy. The nation has become a high-value commodity caught in a global auction where the SAF and RSF are merely the proxies bidding with foreign-supplied arms rather than independent political actors fighting for national interests. And that is the sad truth of this situation. Yeah, it's not about anyone here fighting for national interests. The people of Sudan are suffering because of foreign interests and this foreign imperialism, essentially, again, backed by the US. And I'm hoping that we will one day get Musab Baba on either Global Majority for Peace or on this show to talk a little bit more about Sudan, because there's so much more to cover. Obviously, this was just like an overview of what's actually happening there. Yeah.
So Israel is definitely involved again. It's very interesting. It would be interesting to know the role of Egypt, which is probably very hard to understand because Egypt is in fact a dictatorship by El-Sisi. So that means we'll never be able to hear Egyptian voices talking freely, unless they are on exile, and maybe not even like that. But I will try to get a guest, an exile guest from Egypt, so we can better understand what's going on. Egypt is an extremely important and relevant country. If you see, like, it's bordering with Palestine, it's bordering with Israel, it's bordering with Jordania, it's close to Saudi Arabia, Sudan, Libya. Has such a incredible history, and they have the US ghost of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah, I mean, that is why they're getting
Ghostbusters, isn't it? They are the Ghostbusters of the world. That's what it feels to me.
That is why they're getting $1.3 billion annually in military aid. Like, that is a lot. Like I said, top 3 recipients of US military aid. So, there's a reason, as you said quite rightly, they're very geopolitically strategic position. And so there's nothing, so we can't really say anything about their level of sovereignty. There isn't going to be any real sovereignty in Egypt with this type of military interference in their country. Because again, it's not just the money, right? It's equipment, but it's training, it's maintenance, it's joint military exercises, U.S. joint military exercises with their own troops. So these are not sovereign countries or acting independent from U.S. diktats.
Absolutely,
so,
very interesting. So complex,
Yeah. So there was that. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I think I am delaying the internet.
Oh,
here.
Okay. I was just going to say, like, that, that's a very horrific story. And again, exposing these links from the core of the empire to these regions, the genocides happening around the world. I like to say that genocide is a feature of imperialism, it's not a bug. And so we have to remember that it's a feature of imperialism. And as we can see for the next story too, I mean, unless you want to say something else, I'm going to introduce the next story. Yeah, it really is. Again, it echoes here in the next story, which is Britain's hidden role in the Gaza genocide exposed. Now, we know, most people will know on the show too, that the UK is part of the US empire, is the inner core of the US empire, and that is directly funding or involved in the Gaza genocide. We know that, but these are documents that actually show us, right? They actually show us the proof. So can you expand on what you found?
Yeah, we have a bomb this week, a bomb. So for those who aren't in Britain, we have a very relevant, why it's not sharing my screen? Oh no, it's just delayed. So Declassified, dropped a bomb. They obtain, as you see, documents revealing how the UK company has sent over 1,000 ammunition cases to Israel to put bullets on the head of Palestinian, probably most of them children. What you've seen here, of course, the British press is making sure this news is suppressed. I think that's the first news we have, is the suppression of such a bombastic news. Why is this so bombastic? We all know about this. No. One thing is to imagine in the other word, and the other is to have the names of the companies. And if you are providing weapons to a genocide, you are a direct participant of the genocide. And this is especially damning because the UK government, Keir Starmer, the prime minister who is now in Rio to the COP30 laughing and trying to suck up William's ass, he did not say something else. So the UK government claims it has suspended all license for military exports because of the massive pressure of the British society, who is going to the streets without stopping since the escalation of the genocide for the past 2 years. We have seen 500,000 people after the supposed truce that Trump broke, coming right after the same week, 500,000 people in the UK saying this was a fraud. We want a Palestine state. So in response to that, Keir Starmer pretended that he suspended all licenses for military exports to Israel that could violate international law. But of course, these shipments, they kept flowing right through April 2015. That's what the report shows. So Keir Starmer's lies. Keir Starmer is a Zionist liar. He has launched an unprecedented chase on British journalists. Ileana, I had studied the data of the Home Office in the UK of arrest under terrorist law. Keir Starmer comes to power, all arrests just peak. So Keir Starmer is raging a war on journalists, calling them terrorists that not even the conservatives have dreamed about. So I think this exposes two things. Expose Britain as direct actor in the Palestinian genocide, and this exposed their limitless. You talk about the limitless budget of the US. I'll talk about the limitless hypocrisy of British elites. I haven't seen such a hypocrite, I would say, society in many ways. So the components like ammunition, containers, they aren't technically weapons. Okay, so they slip through the regulations. That it's intentional, so while they are complying with international law, they're killing Palestinians with their weapons. So it's very interesting. I'll give you a little bit of more information here. It's a British engineering firm called Permoid Industries, has shipped over 1,000 ammunition containers to Israel. Israel's largest weapon manufacturer, Elbit Systems, since October 2022. This was revealed by British journalist John McAvoy of Declassified UK. This puts Britain right in the middle of Gaza genocide, a direct involvement with weapon supply. And the report says that these containers are specifically designed to hold artillery shells, mortars, all the ammunitions that are being used by the Israeli Defense Forces, occupation forces, to kill Palestinians. So, and it's also interesting because this report shows how Elbit supplies up to 85% of IDF's land-based military equipment. So we're not talking about any company. We are talking the main supplier to Israeli occupied forces. So Elbit is nothing but just a proxy of communication between Britain and the IDF.
And I think,
do you get the equation? If
and
you
we
have
also,
the main supplier, the IDF, land-based military equipment being supplied by Britain, this tells a story. So this is the direct pipeline of Britain-made competence to fuel wars, while Keir Starmer is lying to our faces that he's not accomplishing genocide.
Yeah, and also we should give the context. We should also give the context. Sorry, there's a delay, so we're having difficulty. But we should give the context that Elbit is the arms manufacturing company that PAL Action was doing direct action against quite successfully, which resulted in them being prescribed as a terrorist organization. So they're still facing trial right now, ongoing. Huda Omari, who I also did interview in my previous podcast. But so I think that is actually going to be reversed, the prescription of action as a terrorist group. I don't know if it, I think they won their last trial, which was a few weeks ago, but I think they have one more to go or something. But we should definitely update on that. So sorry, I don't actually have the updated information.
Palestine action being classified as terrorist. Very interesting, the role. So it seems that Elbit is far more than just a pipeline, like a simple pipeline. It's also ideologically meddling in British politics against Britain's people will.
Yeah, because
Keir Starmer.
Yeah, because not only did they got prescribed because of Elbit. So it wasn't just, like you're saying, they actually got prescribed. So they have direct connection with the British judicial system, or whatever it is, that brings up charges.
We need to talk about that. We need to investigate that. So they're even meddling in the judicial system. That's even worse than meddling just in politics. And you know what, Ileana, Declassified UK, the exact same, has been investigating the infiltration of Zionism in British politics. Yeah, so they have, of course, they are being suppressed by no one in the, let's say, mass media. I don't know how to call them at this point, representatives of the British state, and they want to talk about free press in Britain. I think this is laughable. So Declassified UK exposed far much more. Exposed like the extensive funding ties between Israel lobby, the Embassy of Israel, and the Labour Party. Yes. So they reveal, for instance, that Starmer, along with his cabinet, including Deputy PM Angela Ryan, oh, what a surprise, Chancellor Rachel Cooper, oh, what a surprise, they have received financial backing from pro-Israel groups or individuals, and we are talking about these funds, they come through the so-called lobby. It's very strange to have a country lobbying within the parliament of another one, electing prime minister's elections, right? Putting money on prime minister's election. I would call this espionage, or intervention, illegal intervention.
That's why we have to point out again that it's not separate. Israel is part of the Six Eyes, what is unofficially called the Six Eyes. Five Eyes, remember, is an open intelligence sharing between Canada, US, the UK, New Zealand, and Australia. And it's actually expanded to unofficial Six Eyes because the US has unilaterally sort of taken in Israel. They have a special relationship with Israel, right? As we talked about, Israel is part of the US empire. So it's Six Eyes. So yes, now it's really, I think it was unofficial. Now it's more official as they are gathering closer. So it makes sense. Do you know what I mean? This is why they have outsized power. They're not just a foreign entity. They're part of the inner core of empire. So, we have to remember that.
And the front side as well. Yeah, so it's very impressive because through this lobby that they call Labor Friends of Israel, LFI, it's very opaquely funded, been funding parliamentary groups. So they sponsored, Declassified UK showed that they sponsor over 240 paid trips to Israel for politicians in fact-finding missions, so collectively those trips were £500,000. It seems, this is what they disclosed. And in the last parliament, 41 Labour MPs accepted funding for pro-Israel sources. Who are they governing for? Are they governing for those Israeli interests that pay them pay their way into the parliament, or are they for those who vote them? So while pro-Israel businessman Stuart Rawdon donated over £500,000 to Labour ahead of Starmer elections, so we have a pro-Israel businessman putting £500,000 that we know of in Keir Starmer's election. Keir Starmer is a Zionist, and he is accomplishing everything that he's told to. He's a lapdog of the US. He's a lapdog of Zionism. He is a zilt. And it's impressive because he has no political charisma that you could say, well, that could justify something. He has no public support, and yet he's in power household. Well, it's the dirty trick they played in the elections, and we are going to talk about this at some point.
Yeah, we definitely should be covering more about this, I guess. We will next week.
It's very interesting because I used to work for the British government when Starmer was elected. Everyone was applauding. I mean, it just needed to be a standing ovations. My deputy director sending an email cheering the renewal of power. It was so obvious that the entire civil service was applauding a Labour which is tamed, a Labour Party which does not represent the people of Britain, a Labour Party that is polished, measured, hypocrite. It was really impressive to see that civil servants were so free. Otherwise they don't display their preference, but when Starmer won, people need almost to put a t-shirt with his picture. It was so obvious, the support for Starmer, the stigmatization of the real Labour Party, like with people such as Jeremy Corbyn, John McDowell. So they want this, let's say, spokesmen of Israel ruling their own country. I thought it was shocking how the amount of emails we received during my time in the government legal department celebrating openly, obviously, I wouldn't say openly, but very obviously, British are very subtle. I don't think they were that too subtle on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should move on to the last of our stories, because it is still very much connected to this one in terms of the blatantness, sorry, I can't speak, of Israel right now. As we said before, like, the ethical mosque of Israel is completely destroyed, and only a few very, very brainwashed people still believe in the project of Zionism. But let's look up here this last one, which is basically the self-confessed rapist, the Israeli soldier that confessed to rape in a Palestinian prison, really pointing to a systematic use of rape in that prison, right? Like, documented. Became a celebrity last year. These are the headlines this year about it. So you can see, like, it's back in the headlines again, because there's been some developments on the case. So can you sort of talk us through what's going on, Sarah?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think this is very important. We are talking about the celebrity rapist. It's an Israeli soldier who confessed to the D. Tayman gang rape that happened last year. And this is popping out again for the worst possible reasons. So the problem here is that the Major General, apologies because I don't speak Hebrew, Yat Tomer Yerushalmi, she is the Israel former top military lawyer, and she was arrested now in November because she admitted she leaked the surveillance video of the Tayman Israeli concentration camp. In this video, Ileana, I think we have it here. It's verified by Al Jazeera. It shows 10 Israeli soldiers from the 100th Unit selecting a Palestinian hostage from a large group of tied and blindfolded men. laying on the floor. The victim is dragged across a fence. The guards, using their weapons as tool of torture, sexually abused this detainee in a gang rape. So even the military indictment of this rape said that the blindfolded and bound Palestinian hostage was beaten and sodomized with a sharp object that penetrated near his rectum. So he had severe injuries, multiple surgeries. You know, a medical staffer describes this as the most extreme abuse case of this concentration camp. Yes, this is we can play that. This is the video confirmed by Al Jazeera. And even the UN stepped in and concluded that those abuses are become systematic. At least 75 Palestinians that they die in Israel since October 7, 2023. And I would say it's not systematic. I would say it's a state policy of a colonial force. And I'll tell you why is this a state policy. It's beyond systematic. These people, they are authorized. And it's the UN, I think it was last year, around this time last year, the UN Commission determined that thousands of detainees were subject to widespread and systematic abuse and crimes, sexual crime, as colonial violence. And you know, sexual violence as sexual torture as colonial weapon is not new. Okay, you have the systematic violence against Palestinians. It's not an excess of individual soldiers. It is a state policy. You know, the UN, if you think France used this in Algeria, they have massively documented sexual torture of French against Algerian people, men and women. US in Vietnam, they lots of atrocities. Belgium in Congo, genital mutilations, and how they come or you can mutilate people. I'll talk about this too. So Palestine is a continuation of this colonial policies because it emasculates men. It destroys the Palestinian masculinity, humiliated men, force them to undress. It controls the women. The sexual violence is a terrorist to prevent resistance. Everyone is afraid of being sexually violated. This is something you don't truly recover from. The humiliation to break the will of resistance of an entire people of the most perverted way. Perversion. This is sheer perversion. So genocide and sexual violence is a method, you know, to destroy the Palestinians, their sense of existence, their sense of pride, their sense, their willingness. And you know why this is a state? Look at the video of the rapist here, Ileana. I want to share this with our viewers. The rapist, he went on I want to show a few things about this. I'm just trying to find here. In the meantime, when I don't find this, because well, I'm about to find it. Yeah,
go ahead.
I have it here. It's okay.
Okay.
So what I think is, I don't know how to describe the level of viciousness of that. Look at this man, he is the one who go online and say, well, I am the proud
ישראל. מאיר מכוח 100. שלום לכולם. ערב פרשת דברים. הקדוש ברוך הוא מצווה אותנו בפרשה הזאת, ואני אקריא לכם. ואצווה את שופטיכם בעת ההיא לאמור, שמוע בין אחיכם ושפטתם צדק בין איש ובין אחיו ובין גרו. לא תכירו פנים במשפט, כקטון, כגדול, תשמעון. לא תגורו מפני איש, כי המשפט לאלוהים הוא. והדבר...
What were you saying? Yeah, it's really horrific. So basically he took off his mask because he's proud to be a rapist, essentially. And
yeah, to say I am the rapist. The Bedouins, we are defending Israel against the Bedouins. Of course, this is impressive. The pride that he has in doing this, and not only that, you know what happens after he Okay, sorry.
Something weird about
After
your
he
son.
went online, he became a celebrity star. You know, this is very. I'm sorry, I'm still struggling here. Look, he
What?
became a celebrity star, Ileana. It's. I want to show you this as well. Look how he's received in Israel.
ניתנו לוחם כוח 100 מאיר בן שטרית שהתמודד עם הנוח'בות בשדה תימן ועכשיו מתמודד עם האשמות קשות וכולנו רוצים לשמוע מה יש לו להגיד וגם יהיה, תגיד לי, למה אתה עומד כך?
Just gonna mute that because I can't understand. I see my audience probably can't either. That's him though.
Where he basically is celebrated as a TV star. What society is this? I mean, you need to have societal backing. The Israeli society is not against. I'll show you another clip how people invaded. This is from Al Jazeera. People invaded protesting because they didn't want the rapists to be indicted. This is Israeli protesters asking for the right to rape. I don't know why it's not popping up here I'm sharing the screen. I don't know.
I think it's your internet connection.
Do you have this there? Because I'm trying to.
I mean, I can see it now.
Share it, but it's not. Can you see it?
Yeah, I can see it.
Yes, now. Yeah, so this is Israeli people protesting, saying there is an active right to rape. Yeah, this is what we need to understand. This is not something that the Israeli society is something that they applaud. And not only Israeli society, let me tell you what was the reaction of the authorities. It's absolutely unbelievable because we have Netanyahu at that time saying that now that this footage was leaked and this top lawyer said it was me, Netanyahu went on saying that this was the worst PR disaster in Israel history. She is dismissed not because
she's dismissed because she leaked evidence. Okay, you're back. You froze, but you're back. She was dismissed because she leaked the evidence.
Yeah, she's not dismissed because she leaked war crime evidence. She's dismissed because it's the worst PR disaster, enormous reputational blow. That's how it's qualified in Israel. So you had the parliamentary member, I'm sorry if I don't say it correctly, Hamad Tibi, he was asking, is it legitimate to insert an explosive in the anus of a person? And another member of the Knesset from Likud, Hanok Milvetsky, he responded, not if he is a Nukba, command of Hamas. Everything is legitimate. And everyone is Hamas and everyone is a terrorist. Even children are terrorists in the eyes of Israel. So it's the defense minister of Israel called it a bloody libel against Israel. No, it's real footage. It's real footage. Nobody has ever denied it. The military indictment has the evidence, and this was never been denied. This is not a libel against the soldier. This is the video's authenticity was never been questioned, and the 5 soldiers were indicted. So I think this is war crime. It's worst shape that you can possibly think of.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the issue that we all struggle with, because people are like, well, it's Netanyahu, not the people. It's the US president, not the American public. And we have to remember that when you're living in that country, you are being indoctrinated every single day about the justifications for the actions of your country. So if you're and that happens everywhere. But because it's so overwhelming, like what they're doing is so horrific, and their rhetoric is so overwhelming. The justification has worked for so long. Most people just have heard about this genocide in the last 2 years after October 7th, but actually the genocide has been going on for decades.
Yeah.
And the colonial project has been going on since, 1947, I think. So, I mean, the fact of the matter is, of course, the people inside are going to be brainwashed. And if they're indoctrinated that way, the empathy, the psychosis culture is created through this type of indoctrination and through the policies and what you're exposed to on the day to day. So, it's not surprising that this is happening. They've got to, but it is horrific. It's horrific. And we just, it's good that we talked about it, even though it's such a horrific story, because I think people just need to wake up to it. There's no justification at all for these atrocities at all. There's no mask anymore. So let's just get rid of this mask, the Zionist mask.
And I think you pointed really correctly. It's not Netanyahu, it's the colonial project itself that is the problem.
Yes.
And
exactly.
This colonial project is before even the foundation of Palestine, when Palestine was already a British protectorate. And Britain decided to give it, let's give it to the Jews because we want ourselves, because they are the anti-Semitists themselves and want to be rid of the Jews in Europe.
Yeah.
They call it the Jewish question, the Judenfrage. What are we going to do with the Jewish population? And after the Holocaust, okay, we need to pretend we're putting a home for them. No, we're going to use them as proxy. We're going to get the most radical people and radicalize them even more in the worst sense. It's a Jewish supremacist state that should not exist in this shape and form of a supremacist state. It needs to be equal rights for everyone who lives there. Equal rights. How difficult is that, Ileana?
It's going to be very difficult, to be honest, with, like you were saying, we're talking about the indoctrination of Israelis. It's going to be really difficult, but that's why it has to be dismantled.
Yeah, I think Jews out there, not in Israel, certainly not, but outside Israel, the young generations don't want to be part of this, don't want that Judaism, which is a rich culture, millennial culture, a humanistic culture, becomes swallowed by Zionism, destroyed by Zionism, raped by Zionism.
Yeah, I think a lot of them are speaking up, and rightly so, because frankly, your culture is being taken hostage as well by these forces, and anti-Semitism is actually going to be on the rise because of this. Not as a response, but do you know what I mean? This is actually going to create genuine anti-Semitism because people are going to.
It is. Absolutely.
Zionism, yeah. And it will destroy your culture. So if you don't stand up for your culture now and stand up for humanity now, this is the legacy of that. It's awful. But anyway, I think we did an amazing marathon of 2.5 hours. I don't think I'm pretty sure not many people watch live, but that's okay. It was our first ever. We got to do most of the technical snafus by ourselves, pretty much. And but we will be putting clips up so people can still watch what we have been covering. So.
And I have to thank you for the long-standing friendship and for this amazing invitation and the trust to be part of this beautiful channel, Empire Watch, where it can be so openly blunted about our vision of justice for everyone, as our vision of humanity and humanism, right? And I'm really grateful to have had this very honorable invitation. And I hope this will be one flight of many, many more to come with a growing audience and reaching more and more people around the world. And this reach feels for them an embrace. If people feel hopeless, if people feel abandoned, if people feel lonely in their feelings and thoughts, we want to be that embrace. We want to embrace you. We want to be embraced by you. And we want to share a more humane vision of how the world could be.
Yes, absolutely. Wow. Thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for joining me on Empire Watch. I'm very excited about the journey. ahead, and I do think we're going to grow. So
Great.
I'm happy.
Hi.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
And please leave comments and, share it around, etc. Thank you, guys.
Subscribe. Smash that like button.
Oh, yeah.
Bottom. I used to say bottom. No, button. Button. Not bottom. Button. Bye-bye.
Button. Bye.